The morning started like any other Saturday. The sun was barely up, a soft fuzzy light filtering through the blinds. I heard my wife Sarah stirring beside me, and I felt the usual quiet contentment of a weekend stretching ahead. No alarms, no demanding emails, just coffee and maybe a long walk with the dog. It was a good life, I thought, as I slowly swung my legs out of bed. Little did I know that peaceful feeling was about to be obliterated. I made my way to the kitchen, the smell of freshly brewed coffee already starting to fill the air from the timer I'd set the night before. I poured myself a mug, took a sip and walked over to the sliding glass door that led to the driveway. My car, a relatively new black SUV, sat there. It was my pride and joy, a reward for years of hard work building up my company. And then I saw it. At first I thought it was frost. A weird white dewy layer clinging to the windshield and hood. But the temperature outside was mild, certainly not freezing. I squinted, stepping closer to the door. My heart gave a strange thump in my chest. It wasn't frost, it was something far worse. My car was colored. Not just a few splatters, not just an isolated yolk. It was absolutely drenched in what looked like hundreds of eggs. Yolk, albumin and shattered shell fragments clung to every surface. The windshield was opaque, a slimy yellow-white mess. The side mirrors dripped with viscous liquid. Paint, my beautiful black paint, was obscured by a sickening speckled coat. It looked like a giant angry bird had projectile vomited all over my vehicle. A wave of disbelief, then pure incandescent rage washed over me. Who would do this? Why? My first thought was kids, teenagers with nothing better to do on a Friday night. But this wasn't just messy, it felt targeted and malicious. This was an act of war, not a prank. I threw open the door and stepped out onto the driveway, bare feet hitting the cold concrete. I circled the car, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. Every inch was covered. The roof, the windows, the tires. It was an art installation of pure, unadulterated vandalism. I could smell the faint, sulfurous scent of raw eggs already beginning to bake in the rising sun. I knew what that meant. If I didn't get this off quickly, it would bake onto the paint, etching its corrosive mark permanent. This wasn't just about cleaning, it was about damage control. What in the world? Sarah's voice came from behind me. She must have woken up and heard me. I just stood there staring at the destruction. Oh my God, honey, what happened? Someone egged the car, I managed, my voice tight with suppressed fury. Someone didn't just egg it, they annihilated it. Sarah came up beside me, her hand going to her mouth. That's awful. Do you think it was those kids down the street? The ones who threw toilet paper in Mrs. Henderson's trees? I shook my head slowly, still surveying the damage. No, this isn't kids. This is personal. My eyes scanned the ground looking for clues. A discarded egg carton? A footprint? Nothing obvious, but then something caught my eye. On the passenger side window, just above the handle, where the worst of the eggy goo had run down, a small dark shape stood out against the yellow. It looked like a piece of paper, stuck to the glass, miraculously not completely soaked. I reached out a cautious finger and peeled it away. It was a sticky note. A small, square yellow sticky note, ironically. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read the two words scrawled in messy, almost childish handwriting. Pay up, pay up, pay up for what? My mind raced trying to connect the dots. Debts. Business rivals, but everything was clean above board. I had no enemies, at least none I knew of who would resort to something so petty and destructive. Pay up. It sounded like some kind of bad joke or a demand. Then another detail registered, something about the handwriting. It wasn't familiar exactly, but it triggered a tiny unpleasant flicker of recognition. I'd seen something similar before, maybe on a birthday card, or a casual note passed around at one of Sarah's get-togethers. A specific loop on the weed, a distinctive slant to the A. My blood ran cold. I turned to Sarah, holding up the sticky note. Have you ever seen this handwriting before? She took it, frowned, and her eyes widened. Her face went pale. She looked at the note, then at the car, then back at the note. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Sarah, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Who is this? She swallowed hard, her gaze darting away from mine. I don't know, honey, it just looks like a lot of people's handwriting, she stammered. But her eyes gave her away, she knew. She absolutely knew. Don't lie to me, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Who did this? She took a shaky breath. It just got out of hand. We were just messing around. It was a joke, darling, a stupid joke. My mind reeled. We? Who is we? My friends, she finally admitted, her voice barely audible. Karen, Lisa, Brenda. The names hit me like a physical blow. Karen, Lisa, Brenda, Sarah's closest friend. The women we had over for barbecues, whose kids played with ours, whose husbands I saw at company events. A new colder kind of dread settled in my stomach. Karen, whose husband Mark was my head of sales. Lisa, whose husband David was my CFO. And Brenda, whose husband Tom was my lead engineer. 3 of my most senior, most trusted employees. My wife's friends, they egged my car. And their husbands all work for me. My gaze drifted back to the sticky note. Pay up. What did that even mean? What had Sarah and her friends done? What was the joke? This was not a joke. This was an act of vandalism that could lead to serious consequences, not just for my car, but for my entire company. The smell of raw egg was no longer just unpleasant. It was the stench of betrayal. I looked at my car, then at my wife's horrified face. Monday. Monday was going to be interesting. It was going to be a living hell. The silence in the kitchen was heavier than the egg yolks on my car. Sarah stood across from me, her face a mask of guilt and fear. I couldn't even look at her properly. My eyes kept darting back to the sticky note in my hand, then to the smeared windows of my SUV through the glass door. A joke, I finally managed, my voice raw. Sarah, what kind of joke ends with my car looking like a biohazard? And pay up? What the hell does that even mean? She wrung her hands. It was a silly idea. We had a few too many mimosas yesterday afternoon. We were talking about things. About how you are always working. About how the guys are always working. About how much money you all make and how little fun we have sometimes. My jaw dropped. So this is about money? About my job? Is that why you did this? Because you think I am making too much or not spending enough. The thought was ludicrous. We had a good life. A comfortable life. No, not like that, she insisted, shaking her head vigorously. It wasn't about your money specifically. It was more to symbolic. Like you guys are always so focused on work and success, and we're just there. It was a way to get your attention, I guess. A stupid way, her voice trailed off. Getting my attention? By vandalizing my property and potentially ruining my car's paint job, I felt a cold knot tightening in my stomach. And what does pay up mean then? Pay up for what? My attention. Your boredom, she fit. It was a dare, a silly dare. Karen thought it would be funny. She said we should make you pay for all the late nights and cancelled plans. Not literally pay money, but pay attention. Pay for your time. I stared at her, utterly speechless. This was beyond absurd. This was childish, reckless, and deeply unsettling. So you, my wife, participated in vandalizing our shared property with your friends because you felt neglected. The words tasted bitter in my mouth. It wasn't just me, Mark, she burst out, a hint of desperation in her voice. We were all in it. Karen was the ringleader, honestly. She's been so stressed lately with Mark working on that big project, and Lisa's always complaining about David being glued to his phone even at dinner. And Brenda. Well, Brenda's just Brenda. That usually meant Brenda was the one who could be convinced to do anything. So this was a collective tantrum, I asked, my voice rising. A group protest via egging? Do you have any idea how serious this is? This isn't just about my car. This is about trust. This is about respect. And this is about my company. Her eyes filled with tears. I know, I feel awful, Mark. As soon as we did it, I felt awful. It was supposed to be just a few eggs, a light-hearted prank. But Karen got carried away. She bought like 10 dozen eggs, and then Lisa said we should write a note, and Brenda came up with pay up because it sounded dramatic. 10 dozen eggs. My head spun. That was well over 100 eggs. That explained the sheer volume of slime on my SUV. And you went along with this? I tried to stop them, she mumbled, not meeting my gaze. A little. But they were so hyped up, and after a few mimosas, everything seems funnier, you know? And then it was done before I could really think straight. I didn't know anything about this side of my wife or her friend. These were the women who hosted book clubs and charity luncheons. Not midnight vandal. The image of them tipsy and giggling, slinging eggs at my car was almost surreal. Do they know their husbands work for me? I asked, the real core of my dread forming in my voice. Sarah looked up, her eyes wide. Of course they know. That's part of it. It was supposed to be a message to all of you, to Mark and David and Tom too, because you all work so closely and you are all so busy. The implication hung in the air, a message from the wives delivered through their husbands' boss. It wasn't just a personal slight, it was a professional one. It was a direct attack on my authority, on the very structure of my company. This was not a joke anymore, this was calculated. So this was a coordinated effort to undermine me, and by extension, their own husbands. I felt a chill despite the rising sun. Do their husbands know about this? Sarah bit her lip. No, I don't think so. We swore we wouldn't tell them, it was our secret. A wives' club thing. A secret that would blow up in all our faces on Monday morning. I imagined the conversations. Hey Mark, how was your weekend? Oh, just cleaning egg off my car. Guess who did it? Your wife. The thought made me physically ill. Mark, David and Tom were good men. Dedicated employees, loyal. This wasn't fair to them. They were unknowingly caught in the crossfire of their wives' misguided protest. But what if they did know? What if this was a deeper conspiracy? What if the husbands were complicit, or at least secretly approved of their wives' actions? The thought was even more serious. We have to clean this immediately, I said, pointing to the car, before it bakes on and ruins the paint. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. I was too numb to be angry anymore, just profoundly disappointed. I'll help, Sarah said quickly, relieved to have something practical to do. We spent the next hour in silence, a hose and bucket and sponges our only company. The smell of raw egg was overpowering. Each wipe felt like scrubbing away a layer of my trust, my peace of mind. As I meticulously cleaned the shell fragments from the crevices and wiped away the slimy residue, I couldn't shake the image of Sarah and her friends, laughing, throwing eggs at my car. My car. The symbol of my hard work, my security, my success. Now I just felt like a giant, slimy target. When we were finally done, the car gleamed in the sunlight, but it felt tainted. I could still smell the faint acrid odor, and I could still see the sticky note in my mind's eye, pay up. The silence between Sarah and me was heavy, filled with unspoken accusations and regrets. The peaceful Saturday had evaporated. All I could think about was Monday. What was I going to do? How could I face Mark, David and Tom? How could I continue to work with them knowing their wives had done this? And how could I look at Sarah the same way again? The heart of our life together felt broken, not just cracked. And the thought of it expanding to break the lives of my employees, my friends, was almost unbearable. This was going to be a very long weekend. The air in our house remained thick with unspoken words for the rest of Saturday. Sarah tried to act normal, offering to make my favorite dinner, suggesting we watch a movie, but every gesture felt strained, every smile forced. I found myself watching her, searching for some tell, a sign of genuine remorse that went beyond the immediate panic of being caught. My mind kept replaying the scene in the driveway, the smell of eggs, the sticky note, and Sarah's confession. A joke, she'd called it. A silly idea born of too many mimosas. But it felt like so much more. It felt like a betrayal, not just of my property, but of our partnership, our marriage. I reflected on our life, the one I thought was so good. Had I really been so absent? So consumed by work that she felt this desperate for attention. It was true, I worked long hours. Building a company from scratch wasn't a 9-to-5 job. I was proud of what I'd achieved, the jobs I'd created, the product we brought to market. I did it for us, for our future. Was that a mistake? Had I lost sight of what mattered? I thought about Karen, Lisa, and Brenda. They were Sarah's inner circle. We'd known them for years. We went on double dates, shared holidays, celebrated birthdays. They always seemed so supportive, so friendly. Karen, with her loud laugh and penchant for dramatic stories. Lisa, the quiet, observant one who always seemed to know what was going on. Brenda, sweet and a little dissy, prone to following the strongest personality in the room. I never would have pegged any of them for vandal. But then I started thinking about the complaints Sarah mentioned. Karen's stress about Mark's project. Lisa's frustrations with David's phone habit. I'd heard bits and pieces of this before, casual comments from Sarah. Oh, Karen's been complaining that Mark's never home. Lisa says David is working too much even on vacation. I dismissed them as typical spousal grumbling. Every couple had their issues, right? But this egging, this was a whole new level of expressing marital dissatisfaction. It was an escalation I hadn't seen coming. It made me wonder what else was bubbling beneath the surface of these seemingly perfect friendships and marriages. Was their anger truly about work-life balance? Or was it something else? Jealousy, resentment, and the pay-up note? Sarah said it wasn't about money but about attention. Yet the phrase itself was so loaded with financial connotations. It felt like a deliberate jab, a subtle accusation. Perhaps they felt overlooked, underappreciated, not paid enough in terms of emotional currency or shared experiences. The thought that my wife had joined in this conspiracy, that she had withheld this growing resentment from me, hurt more than the actual egging. Why hadn't she talked to me? Why had she chosen to express her frustration through a destructive act with her friends, rather than a conversation with her husband? It felt like a profound lack of trust. A disconnect I hadn't realized was there. I tried to talk to her again that evening. Sarah, why didn't you just tell me you felt neglected? Why didn't you say something about Mark or David or Tom to their wives? She sighed, staring at her plate of untouched food. It's not that simple, Mark. It's not just about you. It's about all of us, the wives. We talk about it all the time. How our lives changed when you guys started working so much. How we feel like second priority to the company. How we see you all having fun at work, doing important things, and we're just drowned. It sounds silly, I know. It doesn't sound silly to feel neglected, I counted. It sounds serious. But egg in my car, that's not the way to communicate it. We know, she cried, finally looking at me, her eyes brimming with tears. We messed up, we really did. But we just wanted to make a statement, a big one, something you couldn't ignore, and they had succeeded. I certainly couldn't ignore it. The more I thought about it, the more complex it became. This wasn't just a simple act of vandalism. It was a symptom of something much larger. A collective cry for help or attention from a group of women who felt marginalized by their husbands' careers. Careers that I, as their boss, facilitate. Suddenly, the entire situation felt like a pressure cooker, and I was holding the lid. I also couldn't shake the suspicion that there was something more. Sarah's explanation felt a little too neat, a little too rehearsed. Was there another layer, a deeper secret? Or was this truly as superficial as a tipsy dare gone wrong? The pay-up note kept nagging at me. It felt too aggressive for a mere cry for attention. As the evening wore on, the weight of Monday grew heavier. How do I, as a boss, address this? How do I look Mark, David, and Tom in the eye? Do I bring it up? Do I fire them? Can I even prove it? Sarah's confession was enough for me, but it wasn't evidence for a HR case. But then if I don't address it, how can I trust the man white? Thought of facing my employees, knowing their wives had done this, filled me with a sickening mix of anger, embarrassment, and a strange sense of protective pity for the men themselves. There were innocent bystanders caught in the crosshairs of their wives' frustrations. Or were they? Could they have known? Could this have been a collective covert rebellion? The more I turned it over in my mind, the more I realized this wasn't just about an egged car. It was about the fabric of my personal and professional life. The lines between them had blurred, then exploded. The hearth of my home, the warmth and security I thought I had, felt cold and broken. And the thought of what Monday would bring filled me with genuine dread. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Sunday morning dawned, bringing no relief. The dread of Monday loomed like a dark cloud over our house. The silence between Sarah and me was no longer merely strained. It was a chasm. We moved around each other like ghosts, avoiding eye contact, each lost in our own anxieties. I tried to focus on something else, I took the dog for a longer walk than usual, letting him pull me through the quiet streets, trying to clear my head. But every passing car seemed to judge me. Every house felt like it was hiding secrets. I felt exposed, vulnerable. My privacy had been invaded, and the source of the invasion was heartbreakingly close to home. When I got back, Sarah was making breakfast, the clatter of pans unnaturally loud in the quiet kitchen. I sat at the table, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, pretending to be busy. I couldn't bring myself to make small talk. There was too much at stake, too much unsaid. My mind kept cycling through scenarios for Monday. Didn't you want it, man? Ignore it. Pretend it never happened. This was impossible. The emotional baggage alone would crush me. Plus, what if they did it again? What if this joke escalated? Option 2. Confront the husbands directly. Your wives egged my car. This would be explosive. It would humiliate them, potentially destroy their marriages, and certainly damage their professional relationships with me. Could I fire them for something their wives did? Legally, probably not without proof, but ethically it felt like a betrayal of the men themselves. Option 3. Fire them without explanation. This was coward. It would leave them bewildered and potentially ruin their careers without justification. Not my style. Option 4. Approach the wives. This felt like stepping into a minefield. It was Sarah's problem, but now it was mine too. And I was the boss of their husbands. It was far too intertwined. The sheer messiness of it all was overwhelming. This wasn't a clean business problem. It was a tangled web of personal grievances, misguided acts, and professional complications. I thought about Mark, my head of sales. He was a straight shooter, reliable, a family man. David, my CFO, was meticulous, calm under pressure. Tom, my lead engineer, was a genius, a little quirky, but utterly dedicated. These were not just employees, they were key players in my company's success. They were men I respected, men I had built a rapport with over years. The idea of destroying their lives over this felt wrong, but the idea of letting it slide felt even worse. It would send a message that this kind of behavior was acceptable, that my boundaries could be crossed with impunity. I finally looked up from my phone. Sarah was watching me, her eyes red-rimmed. Are you going to fire them? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The question hung in the air. It was the elephant in the room. I don't know, I admitted, and it was the truth. I honestly don't know. What would you do, Sarah? If your employees' husbands, men you trusted, came to work on Monday and you knew their wives had done something like this to you? She looked away, picking at a loose thread on the tablecloth. I guess I'd be furious and confused, and maybe I'd feel really bad for the husbands. Exactly, I said, a bitter laugh escaping me. Because the husbands are innocent here, they didn't do anything. But it came from us, she said, her voice small, from their wives, so it's still connected. It's more than connected, Sarah. It's a direct line. Their wives did this to me and I employ their husbands. It creates an impossible situation. I paused, then asked, did they ever talk about me specifically, or the company? Anything beyond just you guys work too much? She hesitated. Not really, just general grumbling about long hours, missing family events, things like that. Karen sometimes complained that you were too demanding, or that Mark felt pressured to always say yes to you. That stung. Demanding? I am their boss, I expect results. That's how businesses run, and I always treat my employees fairly. I know, Mark, she said quickly. I told her that. I said you are a good boss, but she gets worked up. And then it became this whole thing about you being the big boss who runs everything. And if she could just get your attention, maybe things would change. The big boss. So this was about power and resentment. Not just about time and attention, but about control. This was worse than I thought. It wasn't just a cry for attention, it was a challenge. A misguided, destructive challenge. The day crawled by. I found myself pacing, replaying conversations in my head, trying to find a way out of this impossible situation. I thought about calling a lawyer, but what would I even ask? How to fire someone because their wife egged my car? It sounded insane. I considered calling Mark directly just to get a read on him, but what would I say? Hey, your wife vandalized my car. Are you okay with that? Number? It would be unprofessional, personal, and potentially ruin everything before I even had a plan. Sunday night descended, dark and heavy. Kind of night where the silence in the house hums with unspoken tension. Sarah went to bed early, pretending to be tired. I stayed up, staring into the dark, feeling the weight of the coming day, Monday. The word felt like a physical pain in my chest. The thought of walking into the office, seeing Mark, David, and Tom, knowing what I knew, was almost unbearable. How could I maintain a facade of normalcy? How could I lead them, knowing this deep personal betrayal existed just beneath the surface? This was not just about professional ethics anymore. It was about personal values. About forgiveness, about trust, about what kind of man I wanted to be. And the answers were not coming easily. The car was clean, but the stain on my life felt permanent. I just wanted this weekend to be over, but I dreaded the moment Monday truly began. Monday morning arrived with an almost cruel normalcy. The sun rose, birds chirped, and the city hummed awake around me. But inside I felt anything but normal. My stomach was a tight knot of anxiety and anger. Forced myself to go through my usual routine. Coffee, a quick check of emails, then dressing for work. Each action felt like an act of defiance against the chaos brewing inside me. I decided not to drive my own car. I took Sarah's car, a smaller sedan. The black SUV sat in the driveway, gleaming under the morning sun, a silent, immaculate reminder of the weekend's disaster. I couldn't bear to drive it, to feel the phantom stickiness of the egg, to be reminded of the betrayal. The drive to the office was a blur. I rehearsed scenarios in my head, trying to prepare for the inevitable confrontations. Should I call them into my office one by one? Should I hold a group meeting? Should I bring it up casually? The thought of any of these options made me break out in a cold sweat. When I pulled into the company parking lot, I scanned for their cars. Mark's familiar sedan was there, David's hybrid, Tom's slightly beat-up pickup truck, all present and accounted for. A fresh wave of nausea hit me. I walked into the office, forcing a neutral expression onto my face. The usual morning chatter filled the air. Employees were at their desks, coffee in hand, tapping away at keyboards or chatting quietly. Everything looked normal. Painfully normal. I nodded to a few people, mumbled a good morning, and made my way to my private office. I closed the door behind me, leaning against it for a moment, taking a deep, shaky breath. This was it. My executive assistant, Brenda, a different Brenda, thankfully, knocked on my door a few minutes later. Good morning, Mark. You have the quarterly sales review with Mark Johnson at 9:30. Thank you, Brenda, I said, trying to sound calm. My mind immediately flashed to the other Mark. Mark, the husband of Karen. York, whose wife had led the charge in egging my car. I stifled a bitter laugh. This was going to be fun. 9:30, Mark Johnson, my head of sales, walked into my office. He was a tall, amiable man, always impeccably dressed, with a booming laugh. Today he looked like any other man. He smiled, offered a casual morning boss, and took a seat opposite me. No shiftiness, no averted gaze, just the usual professional demeanor. This was harder than I thought. Could he really not know? Or was he a master of disguise? We went through the sales figures, discussed projections, and strategized for the next quarter. I found myself scrutinizing his face, his gestures. Was there a hint of a tremor in his hand as he pointed to a chart, a flicker of guilt in his eyes? Nothing. He was professional, articulate, and completely focused on work. Just like he always was, the meeting ended and Mark stood up. "Good stuff, Mark," he said, extending his hand. I shook it, trying to gauge the temperature of his palm. "Normal, Mark," I said, stopping him just as he reached the door. He turned, a questioning look on his face. "Do you have a moment? I need to ask you something. Not work-related." His eyebrows furrowed slightly, a hint of caution entering his expression. "Sure, Mark, what's up?" I hesitated. This was the moment. The jump into the abyss. Do I plunge or do I find a different path? My heart hammered. I saw Mark, the good man, the loyal employee, and I saw Karen, the ringleader, egging my car. The two images clashed violently in my mind. "It's about this past weekend," I began, choosing my words carefully. I watched his face closely for any reaction. He looked genuinely puzzled. "The weekend? Anything specific?" His reaction seemed so genuine, so innocent. It made me pause. Could it be true that he really had no idea? That his wife had kept this from him? Thought sent a different kind of pain through me, a pity for him. If she'd lied to me, what else was she lying to him about? My car was burned. "Vandalized," I said, testing the waters. "Someone egged it, badly." Mark's eyes widened. "No kidding? Your black SUV? Man, that's terrible. Kids probably, or some idiots. Did you call the police?" He sounded genuinely sympathetic, almost indignant on my behalf. His reaction was so convincing, it momentarily disarmed. He acted exactly as I would expect any sympathetic colleague to act. No guilt, no discomfort, just a straightforward condemnation of vandalism. "No, I didn't call the police," I said slowly, trying to process his response. I think I know who did it." That got his attention. His casual posture stiffened slightly. "Oh, someone you know?" "Yes," I said, holding his gaze. "Someone I know very well. Someone you know very well too, Mark." A flicker of something crossed his face then. Not guilt, not fear, but understanding. A dawning comprehension mixed with a sudden profound weariness. His shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. He didn't ask, "Who you sure?" He just stood there looking at me, and in his eyes I saw it. He connected the dots. He knew it was his wife. Or at least he knew it was one of the wives, and the dread of it being Karen was now very real to him. "Mark," he said, his voice flat, "are you talking about Karen?" Question hung in the air, thick with unspoken implications. The casual ease of the morning had evaporated. The office, once a place of normal work, was now a minefield of personal betrayal and professional jeopardy. Monday had truly begun. The air in my office crackled with unspoken tension. Mark's question, "Are you talking about Karen?" wasn't really a question. It was a confirmation. A concession. He knew, or at least he strongly suspected. I nodded slowly. "Yes, Mark, I'm talking about Karen," and Sarah confirmed it. She said Karen was the ringleader, along with Lisa and Brenda. I watched his face carefully. Mark's jaw tightened. He walked to the chair he'd just vacated and slowly sat back down. As if the strength had suddenly drained from his legs, he didn't look at me. He stared at his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I had no idea," he said, his voice low, strained. "No idea she'd do something like this, I swear to God, Mark. If I had known, I would have stopped her, or fixed it, or something." He finally looked up, and in his eyes I saw not guilt, but a profound shame and a deep, crushing weariness. "She said it was a joke when I stated," quoting Sarah directly. "A way to get our attention, all of you guys. Working too much. Not enough time for the wives." Mark let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Tension, is that what she calls it?" "I call it insane and incredibly stupid." He ran a hand through his hair, looking utterly defeated. "She's been frustrated for a while. Complaining about my hours, about how much time I spend at the office, about my phone, about everything. But I never in a million years thought she'd resort to something like this. She said it was a wives' club thing, a secret," I pressed. "Did you really not know anything?" "Nothing," Mark insisted, meeting my gaze directly. His eyes were sincere, perhaps even a little desperate. "Not a whisper. She went out with Sarah and Lisa and Brenda yesterday afternoon. Said they were having mimosas, a girls' day out. I came home, she was already there, acting a little giddy. Said they had a great time. I had no clue what that great time involved. He paused, shaking his head. God, my wife egged your car. My boss's car, how am I even gonna look at you? He seemed genuinely blindsided, which offered a measure of relief amidst the turmoil. At least one of them wasn't complicit. This meant I wasn't dealing with a full-blown conspiracy, but rather a rogue group of wives. The sticky note said pay up, and I said. Sarah said it was about paying attention. Was there anything else? Any other issues you know about, something that might have pushed her to this extreme? Mark sighed, a long, drawn-out sound. Karen's been under a lot of pressure lately, not just about my work. Her sister's going through a tough divorce, and Karen's been helping her out a lot, financially and emotionally. And her mother's health isn't great. She's been bottling things up, complaining to her friends, I guess, instead of me. We've been distant. I thought it was just the usual married couple stuff, you know, the grind. He looked at me, a desperate plea in his eyes. This isn't her, Mark, not really. She's not a vandal. She's broken right now. Broken. That word hit me. It resonated with Sarah's own confession, her own feeling of neglect. And it made the whole joke explanation seem even more flimsy. This wasn't a prank. This was a desperate act by women who felt unheard, unseen, and maybe, as Mark suggested, genuinely broken. This impacts you directly, Mark, I said, bringing it back to the professional realm. And David and Tom, your wives, did this. It makes it very difficult for me to continue our professional relationship as if nothing happened. Mark's face fell. Are you going to fire me? His voice was barely a whisper, filled with a raw vulnerability I hadn't expected. This was his livelihood, his family's security. I don't know, I said honestly. I'm trying to figure that out. But this is serious, Mark. This isn't just a minor incident. This is an act of vandalism that could have damaged my property, and it's a profound breach of trust. Not just from your wife, but from Sarah too. And it's entangled with my business. It's a mess. I know it's a mess, he said, running his hands over his face. And I am so sorry, Mark, for this, for her, for whatever she was thinking. He lifted his head, his eyes pleading. Please don't fire me for this. Don't punish me for something she did. I am a good employee. You know I am, and I'll fix this. I'll make Karen apologize. We'll pay for any damage. Whatever it takes. His sincerity was palpable. It shifted something inside. Pure rage I'd felt was softening, giving way to a complicated mix of anger, disappointment, and now a surprising surge of pity for the man sitting across from him. He was clearly a victim in his own way, caught in a marital storm he hadn't seen coming. I need to talk to David and Tom, I said, my voice firm but not accusatory. I need to understand the full scope of this. Of course, Mark said, relief washing over his face at the implied reprieve. I'll tell them, or should I not? Should they hear it from you? He looked torn. Let me call them in, I decided. I need to hear it from them directly. And Mark, please understand, this is not just about the eggs, this is about the trust, and about understanding why and how we move forward from here. He nodded, pushing himself to his feet. Understood. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for not just reacting. I appreciate it more than you know. He left my office looking more like a man who had just confessed a deep personal failing than a successful head of sales. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. 1 down, 2 to go. And then the biggest conversation of all, with my own wife. Mark's words about Karen being broken echoed in my mind. Was Sarah also broken? Were all the wives? And what exactly was I going to do about it? The situation was unraveling, and the truth, though painful, was starting to emerge. It was far more complex than simple vengeance. I took a moment after Mark left, letting the conversation set. His reaction, his genuine shame and regret, had complicated my initial desire for retribution. This wasn't a simple case of blaming the husbands. This was deeper. I picked up the phone and called David, my CFO. He walked in a few minutes later, his usual calm, collected demeanor firmly in place. David was precise, logical, and rarely showed emotion. That made his reaction all the more impactful. David, I began, skipping the pleasantries. My car was egged over the weekend, and I have reason to believe Lisa was involved, along with Karen and Brenda. His face, usually impassive, drained of color. He blinked slowly as if processing a complex calculation. Lisa, he finally said, his voice flat. My wife? I nodded. Sarah confirmed it. She said it was a joke, a wives' club thing to get our attention because we work too much. David closed his eyes for a moment, a muscle twitching in his jaw. When he opened them, they were filled with a profound weariness mirroring Mark's. I am so sorry, Mark. I can't believe this. He rubbed his temples. She's been mentioning how lonely she feels, how I am always on my phone, how my mind is always at work even when I am home. I tried to do better, I really did, but this... Did you know about it? I asked, cutting to the chase. Number God, no, he said, shaking his head vehemently. She said she was going out with the girls for a brunch. Came home happy, giggling about some private joke. I had no idea it involved vandalism and your property. He looked directly at me. I apologize on her behalf, Mark, profoundly. Whatever damage was done, we'll pay for it. Whatever needs to be done to make this right. David's reaction confirmed what Mark had said. They were genuinely unaware. This made their wives' actions seem even more insidious. A secret war waged behind the men's backs. The sticky note said, "Pay up," and I said, watching him closely, "Any idea what that meant to Lisa?" David hesitated. Lisa is a very proud woman. She's also very competitive. She's often felt like she's in your wife's shadow, or the other wife's shadows, because Sarah is so outgoing and active in the community. She's also recently been struggling with infertility. We haven't told anyone yet. She's been very withdrawn, very emotional, I think. I think maybe she felt overlooked. Not paid up in terms of her own struggles being recognized, or her efforts as a wife and mother figure, even though she can't have kids right now. His voice cracked slightly. She's been through a lot lately. This was another layer. Infertility. That was a deep personal pain. It suddenly cast Lisa's involvement in a different light. Not just a neglected wife, but a suffering one. The pay-up note, interpreted through this lens, could mean pay attention to my pain, pay up for the lack of support, pay for what I am going through. Thank you for telling me, David, I said, genuinely moved by his honesty and vulnerability. I appreciate your candor. Next was Tom. Tom, my brilliant but introverted lead engineer. He came in, looking slightly rumpled as usual. Tom, I began repeating the grim detail. Your wife Brenda was involved in egging my car this weekend. Tom blinked, then squinted, as if trying to process a complex algorithm. Brenda, egging a car. Are you sure, Mark? Brenda wouldn't hurt a fly. His reaction was one of pure bewildered disbelief. Sarah confirmed it, I repeated patiently. Along with Karen and Lisa. Tom's expression shifted from disbelief to a slow dawning of horror. Oh my, Brenda. She gets easily influenced, especially by Karen. Karen has a very strong personality. Brenda just likes to please people. She wouldn't have thought it through. He ran a hand through his already messy hair. I'm so incredibly sorry, Mark. I don't even know what to say. It's completely out of character for her, unless she was egged on, no pun intended. He even managed a weak, nervous chuckle, which died quickly. Did you know about this? I asked. Of course not, Tom exclaimed, finally showing some animation. She said she was going to a ladies' brunch, came home a little giggly, like she had too much sugar. My God, what was she thinking? I'll make sure she helps with the cleanup, of course, and any costs, and I'll talk to her immediately. The note said, pay up, and I said, any thoughts on what that might mean for Brenda? Tom looked away, chewing on his lip. Brenda's always felt a bit insecure, like she's not as smart or as successful as the other wives. She looks up to Sarah and Karen especially. She's always trying to fit in. She also worries a lot about our finances. Even though we're fine, she hates to ask for anything, always feels like a burden. Pay up. Maybe she feels like she hasn't paid up enough in her own life, so she has to pay in other ways to be accepted. Or maybe it's just what Karen told her to write. He shrugged, utterly lost. Listening to these men, hearing their raw honesty, I felt the puzzle pieces beginning to fall into place. This wasn't just about my car. This was about neglected wives battling personal demons, feeling invisible, unappreciated, and desperate for an outlet. Karen stressed and possibly manipulative. Lisa silently suffering through infertility. Brenda insecure and easily led. And Sarah, my own wife, caught in the middle, swept up in their collective frustration. The pay-up note wasn't a singular message, it was a layered scream. For attention, for recognition of pain, for a sense of belonging, for validation. It was a cry from their hearths, their homes, that felt diminished by the demanding careers of their husbands. I dismissed Tom, feeling a heavy weight in my chest. This was far more complicated and far more heartbreaking than I had ever imagined. My initial anger had now morphed into a profound sense of sadness. Sadness for my employees who are now caught in the wake of their wives' ill-conceived action. Sadness for the wives who felt so unheard they resorted to vandalism. And sadness for my own marriage, which felt suddenly fragile and exposed. Path forward was becoming clearer, but no less daunting. It wasn't about punishment, it was about healing, and it had to start with my own wife. Walking home from the office that evening felt like walking into a storm. Conversations with Mark, David, and Tom had peeled back layers of a much larger, more painful truth. My wife's friends, were not just bored or angry, they were hurt. And their pain had manifested in a destructive act that had rippled through all our lives. When I entered the house, Sarah was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with an almost frantic energy. The aroma of garlic and onions filled the air, a stark contrast to the emotional tension that hung heavy between us. "Hey," she said without turning, her voice strained. "We need to talk, Sarah," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "I spoke to Mark, David, and Tom today." She froze, the knife clattering onto the cutting board. She slowly turned, her face pale. "And they had no idea," I said, watching her closely. "Not a single one of them knew their wives were involved in this. They were shocked, ashamed, and profoundly apologetic. They're good men, Sarah. They don't deserve this." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I know," she whispered. "I feel so terrible for them. I tried to tell them it was a bad idea, but Karen was just so determined. And Lisa and Brenda just went along with it. Karen's under a lot of stress, her sister's divorce, her mother's health," I recounted, watching her reaction. "Lisa's struggling with infertility." Sarah's eyes wide. "She told David that?" "Oh, poor Lisa. I knew she was having a hard time, but I didn't know it was that bad. We don't talk about that kind of stuff in detail. And Brenda feels insecure, like she's not good enough. And she's easily influenced," I continued. "Is that right?" Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face now. "Yes, that's all true. They're all going through so much. We all are." I walked closer to her, taking her hands, which were cold despite her being in a warm kitchen. "And what about you, Sarah? What are you going through? What's your real reason for participating in this? Because neglected feels like it's only part of the story." She looked at our clasped hands, then back at me, her eyes raw with emotion. It's about everything, Mark. It's about feeling like I am losing myself. We used to have so much fun. We used to go out, travel, just be us. Now it's always about work." "Your work." "My work as a supportive wife. It feels like I am just an accessory to your success, not a partner in our life. But why wouldn't you just tell me this?" I asked, my voice filled with a desperate plea for understanding. Why resort to something so destructive? Her grip on my hands tightened. "'Cause I did try, Mark, so many times. I'd say I was lonely or I wanted to spend more time with you. And you'd nod, you'd agree, you'd say you'd try. And then the next big project would come up or a crisis at work, and it would be the same all over again. I felt like I was talking to a wall. I felt like I wasn't important enough to you to make a real change." The words hit me hard. I had been so focused on providing, on building, that I hadn't truly listened. I had heard, but I hadn't truly understood the depth of her loneliness, her feeling of being sidelined. "And then," she continued, her voice trembling, "Karen came up with the idea. She was so angry, so frustrated about Mark. She said we needed to do something drastic, something that would make you all stop and pay attention. Something that would show you we weren't just decorative wives waiting at home. The pay-up note. That was her idea. She said it was a symbol. Pay up for our time, pay up for our loneliness, pay up for making us feel invisible." A shocking realization hit me then, a cold wave that spread through my entire body. And she said pay up was her idea. "To me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Sarah nodded, a new wave of tears rolling down her cheek. "Yes," she said, "you were the one who pushed the hardest, who set the example for the other husbands. She said if you felt the impact, the others would too. But Karen's sister." "You said she's going through a difficult divorce," I said, a sudden terrible thought forming in my mind. "And Karen's been helping her out financially?" Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. "Yes, it's been a huge drain on her. That's why she's been so stressed." "And what was her sister's husband's name?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. Sarah frowned, confused by the sudden change of topic. "Oh, his name is Greg." Why? My blood ran cold. Greg Harmon. The name echoed in my head like a death knell. Greg Harmon, the man who had been my business partner for 5 years, before we had a massive falling out. A falling out that ended with me buying him out of the company for far less than he thought his share was worth, after some questionable financial dealings came to light on his part. It was messy, it was ugly, and it was the reason I was the sole owner of my company now. It was also a very painful chapter I had tried to forget. Karen's sister was married to Greg Harmon. "Oh my God," I breathed, the full horror of the situation crashing down on me. This wasn't just about neglected wives, was it? This was about revenge. Karen was getting revenge for her sister, and pay-up wasn't just about attention, it was about money. It was about Greg's money. It was about what she felt I owed him or her sister. Sarah's face was a mixture of shock and dawning horror, as the pieces clicked for her too. What? No, Mark, that's impossible. She never said anything about Greg. She never mentioned him to me. She just said she wanted to get your attention. Her voice was filled with a desperate denial. But it all made sense. The intensity of the egging, the specific phrase, pay up, Karen's relentless pursuit of this joke. It wasn't just a group of frustrated women. It was Karen, manipulating the situation, leveraging her friends' grievances to execute a personal vendetta against me. The hearth-breaking element had just taken a shocking, painful twist. This wasn't just about my car or my employees' wives or even my marriage. This was a direct, calculated attack stemming from a past betrayal masked by a facade of marital neglect. My wife had been an unwitting pawn in someone else's vendetta. I sank into a chair, the smell of garlic and onions suddenly sickening. The reality was worse than I could have imagined. I had been naive, thinking this was just a group of misguided wives. It was far more sinister. And it meant the decisions I had to make now were even more agonizing. My company, my employees, my marriage, all of it felt on the verge of collapse. The revelation about Karen's true motive hit me like a physical blow. The air felt thin, the kitchen too small. Sarah stood there, frozen, the truth dawning in her eyes, a mixture of horror and confusion. Greg Harmon, I repeated, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. Karen's sister is married to him, my old partner, the one I had to buy out because he was stealing from the company. Pay up wasn't about attention. It was about getting back at me for what happened to her brother-in-law. Sarah stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth. Number, Mark? No, she couldn't have. She never mentioned him. She never even said her sister was married to that Greg. It was always just my sister's going through a tough time. This is unthinkable. It's the only thing that makes sense, I said, my voice flat. The intensity of the egging, the pay-up note, her insistence on it. She used your collective frustrations as a smokescreen, Sarah. She manipulated you all. And you, my wife, helped her execute a personal vendetta against your own husband. The last words were sharp, filled with a hurt that went beyond anger. Sarah started to cry, deep, racking sob. I didn't know, Mark. I swear to you, I didn't know. I never would have done something like that. Not if I had known the real reason. Her denial was genuine, her distress real. That, at least, offered a sliver of comfort amidst the devastation. She was manipulated, not complicit in the vendetta. But the fact remained. My wife had been part of this, even unknowingly. The trust had been fractured, not just by her participation, but by her inability to see what was happening, her blindness to Karen's true intentions. This changes everything, I said, running a hand through my hair. This isn't just about a joke gone wrong. This is about calculated revenge. And it means Karen is dangerous. And that means her husband, Mark, is indirectly connected to someone who actively tried to hurt me and my property. The other women, Lisa and Brenda, were unwitting participants too. This is a mess of epic proportions. My mind raced. What did this mean for my company? Could I keep Mark, David, and Tom? They were innocent, their wives manipulated. But the ringleader was Karen, Mark's wife. How could I overlook that? It felt like a direct threat to my business, my safety, my very peace of mind. I thought about firing Mark. It felt like the logical self-preservation move. Cut out the problem at its source. But Mark was innocent. He was a good man, a valuable asset to my company, a friend. And he was caught in the middle of his wife's deception and my past. Firing him would destroy his family, and it would be for something he didn't do. That felt wrong, deeply unethical. But what if I didn't fire him? What kind of message would that send? That I was weak. That I would tolerate such an insult, such a betrayal, even if indirect. It could embolden Karen or others. It could create a poisonous atmosphere in the company. I needed clarity. I needed advice that wasn't colored by emotion. I decided to call my mentor, an old business associate named Robert. He was retired now, but his wisdom was legendary. Robert, I explained the situation. From the egging to Sarah's confession, to the shocking revelation about Karen and Greg Harmon, I left nothing out. He listened patiently without interruption. When I finished, the line was silent for a long moment. "Mark," he finally said, his voice calm and steady. "This is a hell of a hand you've been dealt. Your first instinct might be to retaliate, to fire, to punish. But that's a short-term solution for a long-term problem. You are not dealing with a simple insubordination here. You are dealing with human pain, manipulation, and the messy intersection of personal and professional lives." "So what do I do?" I asked, desperate. "You have two paths, Mark," he said. "One is justice, which might feel satisfying in the moment, but could lead to a lot of collateral damage. Ruined lives, a fractured company culture, and a lasting bitterness. The other is healing. That's harder. That requires empathy, vulnerability, and a willingness to untangle the knots instead of just cutting them." "Healing for whom?" I asked. "Karen, who tried to get revenge on me. For my wife, who participated in it. For me, who feels betrayed. For everyone, Mark," Robert said. "Including you. You have to decide what kind of leader you want to be, and what kind of man you want to be. Do you want to be the one who fires people for their wives' actions, or the one who finds a way through a devastating personal crisis? It's not about being weak. It's about being strong enough to choose a harder path," continued. "If you fire Mark, David, and Tom, what does that solve? You punish innocent men, create a culture of fear, and you don't address the underlying issues with their wives. Your wife still has these friends and she's still hurting, and you are still dealing with the fallout of your past. This isn't just about them. This is about you. And Sarah." His words resonated deeply. "Firing them would be easy, but it wouldn't solve the core problem. It wouldn't mend a broken trust with Sarah. It wouldn't address the pain that had led the wives to this point. It wouldn't heal my own anger and sense of betrayal." "You need to confront Karen directly," Robert advised. "Not as their boss, but as someone she actively tried to hurt. And you need to do it with Sarah by your side. She needs to see the full extent of her manipulation. And then you need to talk to your employees. Not to fire them, but to address the elephant in the room. To talk about trust, respect, and boundaries. And to find a way to move forward together." His words painted a daunting path. Confrontation, vulnerability, a long, difficult road to reconciliation. But it felt right. It felt like the only way to genuinely heal the wounds, rather than just covering them up. "And my wife?" I asked, looking at Sarah, who was still silently crying. "Your wife needs to understand the gravity of her actions, even if manipulated," Robert said gently. "And you both need to work on reconnecting. This egging, this joke, was a symptom of a deeper problem in your own marriage too. You both need to acknowledge that and work on it together." The weight of the decision still pressed on me, but now it was tinged with a new sense of purpose. This wasn't about punishing. It was about rebuilding, but rebuilding a life that had been fundamentally shaken. This was going to be the hardest conversation of my life, but it had to happen. The next few days were a blur of difficult, agonizing conversations. It started with Sarah. After Robert's call, I sat her down and we talked for hours. Really talked. For the first time in what felt like years. She expressed her pain, her feelings of neglect, and her deep regret for participating in the egging. I in turn acknowledged my part in her feeling overlooked, my over-focus on work, and my failure to truly listen to her needs. It was raw, emotional, and utterly exhausting, but it felt like the first step toward mending the profound rift in our marriage. The hardest part was still to come, confronting Karen. Sarah was terrified, but I insisted she'd be there. This wasn't just my fight, it was hers too. She needed to understand the depth of Karen's manipulation and reclaim her own sense of agency. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop on a Thursday afternoon. Under the guise of trying to clear the air after the joke, Karen arrived looking defiant and a little nervous. She tried to play it off as a harmless prank, a misunderstanding. But as I calmly laid out the facts, mentioning Greg Harmon, her sister's divorce, and the pay-up note's true meaning, her composure shattered. Her face went from defiant to ashen. She tried to deny it, but her eyes betrayed her. The truth was out. "This wasn't a joke, Karen," I said, my voice steady but cold. "This was a calculated act of revenge, thinly disguised as a wives' protest. You manipulated my wife and Lisa and Brenda into vandalizing my property, exploiting their genuine frustrations for your own vendetta. That's despicable." Sarah, tears in her eyes, added, "Karen, how could you? How could you use us like that? I thought we were friends." Karen broke down, not in apology, but in a torrent of bitterness and resentment, finally admitting her rage over Greg's financial losses and her desire to see me pay for it. It was ugly, raw, and deeply unsettling. We left the coffee shop feeling sickened, but also with a sense of grim resolution. The truth, however painful, was necessary. The fallout with the wives was swift and devastating. Lisa, when Sarah and I spoke to her privately, was horrified. She immediately confronted Karen and cut ties, expressing deep regret for her participation and offering a sincere apology, especially when she learned about the manipulation. Brenda, easily led, was simply bewildered and ashamed, apologizing profusely and promising to stay far away from Karen. Sarah and I knew our friendship with Karen was irrevocably over, but the others, with time and effort, might be salvaged. Then came the meeting with Mark, David, and Tom. I called them into my office the next morning. I didn't mince words. I laid out everything. Sarah's initial confession, their wives' individual struggles, Karen's true manipulative motive. I watched their faces as the realization of Karen's betrayal dawned on Mark. He looked shattered, his wife's actions now revealed as a calculated act of revenge, not just a misguided tantrum. David looked resigned, and Tom, as always, bewildered. "I could fire all of you," I told them, my voice firm, "for an act of vandalism committed by your spouses, regardless of your knowledge. But I am not going to." They looked up, a glimmer of hope in their eyes. "Because I believe you are innocent in this," I continued. "And because I believe in second chances, and in finding a path to healing, not just punishment." However, I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. This has shattered trust. Not just between me and your wives, but with the professional boundaries of this company. This cannot happen again, ever. I proposed a new path forward. Each of them, starting with Mark, would be required to have serious, open conversations with their wives about respect, boundaries, and accountability. There would be no more wives' club secrets that could spill over into our professional lives. I also suggested marriage counseling for any of them who needed it, acknowledging the underlying pain that had led to this. I made it clear that I would offer support where I could, but the responsibility to mend their personal relationships and ensure no further incidents fell squarely on their shoulders. For Mark, the conversation was particularly difficult. His marriage was clearly in crisis. Karen's betrayal had been profound. I told him I wouldn't fire him, but I also stated that Karen would no longer be welcome at company events. He understood. He promised to deal with his wife and his own relationship. The response from my employees was humbling. Mark looked like a man who had been given a second life. David was quietly grateful. his usual stoicism replaced by genuine relief. Tom looked less confused, more determined to make things right. They were embarrassed, but also immensely relieved, and I hoped, truly committed to earning back the trust that had been so dramatically broken. The following weeks were a slow, painful process of rebuilding. Sarah and I started marriage counseling. It was tough, exposing uncomfortable truths, but we were finally talking, truly listening to each other. We learned to carve out dedicated time for each other, protecting our us time from the relentless demands of work. Our hearth felt like it was being slowly, carefully pieced back together. At work, the atmosphere was different. More cautious perhaps, but also more transparent. I made sure to communicate more openly, to foster an environment where employees felt heard. I encouraged work-life balance, not just for them, but for myself. The incident served as a stark reminder that even the most successful businesses are built on human relationships, and those relationships need nurturing, both at work and at home. My black SUV sat in the driveway, gleaming. The egg residue had been meticulously cleaned, the paint polished back to its original shine. But every time I looked at it, I remembered. I remembered the anger, the betrayal, the shocking revelation. And I remembered the painful, difficult steps we had taken to move forward. The ending of my car was a shocking hook, a moment of destruction that ripped open the fabric of my life. It was a symptom of deeper pain and manipulation, a heartbreaking event that forced us all to confront uncomfortable truths. We were not perfect. Our lives were not as serene as they seemed, and sometimes the biggest threats come from the places you least expect. Monday had indeed been interesting, but it wasn't the end. It was the messy, painful, and ultimately hopeful beginning of a new chapter for all of us. Chapter where trust was slowly being rebuilt, and the true meaning of pay up was finally understood. To pay attention, to pay for mistakes, and to pay the price of rebuilding what was broken, one careful piece at a time.